It was January in Asheville, cold enough that breath hung in the air, and the parking lot lights threw long, yellow pools on wet asphalt. 2 weeks after an 18-year-old boy failed to come home from his shift at Walmart, his Mazda sat with its headlights drained, a small, live puppy trapped inside the passenger compartment, and a message scrawled in pink lipstick across the rear windshield, an exclamation mark, or maybe lips and an exclamation point. People remember the details differently. The car belonged to Zebb Quinn. He had not been seen since the night of January 2nd, 2000. I'm Erin Caldwell, and this is Still Unanswered. Today, we tell the story of Zebb Quinn, the last confirmed sighting in a gas station parking lot, the eerie staging of his abandoned car, the decades-long wait for answers, and a plea deal that left the family with legal closure but no grave to visit. This is a case that looks, on paper, like it was resolved, but the truth, as you'll hear, is far less tidy.
Erin, thanks for having me. When I first reviewed this file, I remembered thinking about how unusually violent the public arc of this case was. A young man disappears in 2000, then the primary person of interest resurfaces in 2015 in connection with a double murder that shocks the region. Those later crimes forced investigators to look again at old leads they hadn't been able to prove before. But even with that, the persistent problem is the lack of a body and the shifting storylines. That combination makes everything harder.
We'll walk through that chronology carefully. We'll start with who Zebb was, then reconstruct his last confirmed hours. We'll examine the car, the early investigation, the way the case cooled, and then the 2015 crimes that forced a re-examination. And we'll spend a long time on 2017 and 2022, the indictment and the plea, because those are the moments when the criminal justice system tried to convert suspicion into legal reality. But throughout, we'll return to the family, and especially to Zebb's mother, Denise Vlahakis, who has lived with this uncertainty for more than 2 decades. So, who was Zebb Quinn? He was born May 12, 1981, raised in Asheville, North Carolina. Polite, soft-spoken, the phrase I kept seeing in reports was "good kid." He'd graduated from T.C. Robertson High School and was taking classes at AB Tech Community College. He was in ROTC, worked the electronics department at the Hendersonville Road Walmart, and lived at home with his mother. He wasn't a loner, but he wasn't extravagant. He was an ordinary 18-year-old who liked the idea of a sportier car and was saving toward a Mitsubishi Eclipse he hoped to buy. Not someone who planned to walk away from family and future.
That ordinary profile is important. People who run usually leave a trail. Financial accounts, a phone that suddenly lights up, friends or family who say goodbye. None of those things happened with Zebb. No verified bank activity, no credible sightings after January 2nd, and, to his mother's knowledge, none of the things you'd expect if someone decided to vanish on purpose.
Right. The night itself, January 2nd, 2000, begins in a way that's painfully mundane. Zebb finishes his shift at around 9 p.m. at the Walmart on Hendersonville Road. Surveillance and coworkers confirm that. He planned to meet a coworker, Robert Jason Owens, after work. They were going to drive west toward Leicester to look at that eclipse. That's the last moment we have independent confirmation of Zebb. Around 9:15 p.m., surveillance captured both men at a nearby convenience store. They bought sodas and then each left in separate vehicles, Zebb in his Mazda Protegé and Owens in a Ford pickup. That convenience store footage is the last confirmed sighting of Zebb alive.
After that, the accounts diverge. Owen's initial story, which changed over the years, said that they pulled over because Zebb's pager went off or he needed to use a payphone. He reportedly left the car briefly, came back upset, and then, in the chaos, allegedly rear-ended Owen's truck while trying to leave quickly. Owens told investigators he later sought medical treatment for injuries from that minor accident. No independent witness ever corroborated the roadside stop or a panicked phone call.
There are a few things about that sequence that prosecutors found suspicious from the very beginning. One, days later, a call came into Walmart from someone impersonating Zebb, saying he was sick and wouldn't come in. The supervisor who took the call said the voice did not sound like Zebb. Two, a handwritten note showed up at Walmart, ostensibly signed by Zebb, that excused him from work for a few days. Handwriting analysts later concluded the note appeared to be in Owen's handwriting. Those are the kinds of details that, even without a body, push suspicion toward a single person.
Yes. In no-body investigations, you look for patterns of deception, attempts to impersonate the missing person, forged notes, inconsistent statements. Those things don't prove murder by themselves, but they are evidence of consciousness of guilt. They suggest somebody is trying to create a false trail.
For 2 weeks, the family worried and searched. Then, around January 16th, roughly 2 weeks after Zebb was last seen, his Mazda was found in the Little Pig's Barbecue parking lot on McDowell Street in Asheville. And that's when a new set of strange, almost theatrical clues appeared. The headlights were on until the battery went dead. Inside the car was a small, live puppy, not Zebb's dog, according to the family. A hotel keycard was found, and on that rear windshield, the lipstick mark, or the lips and exclamation point. Food and drink containers, consistent with the items they bought at the gas station, were reportedly present. But there was no blood, no obvious signs of a struggle publicized, and no scene we could call a murder site. Just a car left in a public, busy lot with bizarre, attention-grabbing items inside and on it.
The condition of the car raises two broad hypotheses. 1. Staging. Somebody left these odd items deliberately to distract, misdirect, or send a message. 2. It was abandoned abruptly, and the items are incidental. The presence of a live puppy and lipstick is unusual and screams of intentionality to me. If you want the car found, left in a place where people will notice, placing a puppy and a keycard inside pretty much guarantees the world will look at it.
Exactly. Was it meant to imply a romantic encounter? Was it a taunt? Or was it just an attempt to get the Mazda found so whoever had the keys could get rid of it without leaving it hidden? We'll never know for sure. But the lipstick, the key, the puppy, those became focal points in the investigation because they suggested someone wanted the car discovered, not concealed. Of course, the most painful missing piece was and remains Zebb himself.
Investigators drilled down on Owens early. He was, after all, the last person seen with Zebb. They obtained warrants, examined his truck, obtained biological samples, and ran tests. But they did not, at the time, have physical evidence. Blood in his truck, the firearm, or human remains directly tying him to murder. And in a criminal prosecution, those gaps matter enormously. Juries are more comfortable convicting when there's a victim's body, a cause of death, and physical linkage to the accused.
For years, the case stagnated. The family kept pressure on police. Coverage resurfaced on anniversary pieces and in documentaries. Then, in 2015, everything changed. Two people in Leicester, not far from Asheville, Chef Christy Codd, a Food Network star alum, and her husband, J.T. Codd, disappeared. The investigation revealed evidence of horrific violence. Robert Jason Owens, who had worked at their house as a contractor, was arrested. The items investigators seized from Owens' property, allegedly stolen from the Codds, and later the discovery of remains connected Owens to that crime. Suddenly, a person who had been a person of interest in a cold disappearance became a suspect in a newly public and proven violent crime.
And that's when prosecutors' posture can shift. A new, provable, violent crime, especially one where there is physical evidence of murder, can change how detectives revisit old files. As a former prosecutor, I can tell you, when you have a suspect in custody for a recent, violent crime, you can subpoena records, execute new warrants, and search properties you might have previously avoided because you didn't have probable cause. It often provides the legal leverage to re-examine old allegations.
In 2017, a Buncombe County grand jury indicted Owens for first-degree murder in Zebb's disappearance. For the family, it felt like vindication after 17 years. But that indictment would not immediately lead to a public trial. There were postponements, personnel changes in the district attorney's office, and then the pandemic, which halted many court calendars. That delay, stretching into years, allowed Owens' legal team to strategize and, eventually, negotiate.
Here's where the legal reality bites. Prosecutors must judge whether they'll secure a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. No body, no murder weapon, limited corroborating physical evidence, those are significant hurdles. If they believe their case is weak on certain points, a plea to accessory after the fact can be a strategic alternative. It provides an admission of criminal responsibility, that the person aided someone after a murder, and avoids the risk of a full acquittal at trial. It isn't justice in the fullest sense, but it's a common, pragmatic choice in difficult cases.
On July 25, 2022, Owens pled guilty to accessory after the fact to first-degree murder in Zebb's case. That plea effectively meant the state accepted that Zebb had been murdered and that Owens had assisted after the fact. The more serious first-degree murder charge was dropped. Owens' sentence for this offense was to run concurrently with the sentence he already faced, essentially life, from his conviction in the Codd murders. So, practically speaking, he remains incarcerated for life. But for Denise and her family, the plea posed a bittersweet answer. Legal acknowledgement, yes. Full truth, no.
Owens' courtroom narrative that accompanied the plea is, at best, complicated and, at worst, self-serving. He recounted what he described as a love triangle, that Zebb had been pursuing a young woman, often referenced in filings as Taylor, who was in a relationship with a man named Wesley Smith. Owens claims Smith hired Owens' uncle, Walter Gene Owens, to shoot Zebb in Pisgah National Forest, and that Gene then dismembered and burned Zebb's body. Owens said he helped conceal the aftermath. Now, there's a procedural logic to this account. It shifts the actual killing to a dead relative who can't contest the story and pins accessory liability on Owens. But it also raises enormous questions about credibility.
The prosecutors themselves made clear they were skeptical. They accepted the plea, but they also said Owens' account was, in part, self-serving. Why is that important? Because in Owens' version, the dead relative, Gene, is the triggerman. Gene died in 2017 before he could be charged. Wesley Smith, the alleged jealous boyfriend, has not, to our knowledge, been charged in Zebb's disappearance. So we have a narrative implicating folks who can't be tried for this crime, while the man who told the story gets the lesser conviction in exchange for cooperation, such as it is. The family, understandably, is left holding the story with its holes.
From an evidentiary standpoint, Owen's story has some features that align with the way he was later alleged to have acted: disposing of bodies, burning remains, stealing from victims. Patterns prosecutors say existed in the Cod case. That patterning can lend plausibility, but plausibility is not proof. Without physical corroboration, items tied to Zebb, ballistics that match, DNA in a location identified in Owen's account, the narrative remains an untested explanation. The dead can't rebut, and unindicted others sleep peacefully unless evidence emerges.
And that leaves family members like Denise in a liminal place. She told reporters that the plea felt like both a relief and a theft. Someone told her her son had been killed, but she still had no body to bury. She has no gravesite. Anniversaries remain a calendar wound. The emotional weight of, did they get the right story, hangs over everything.
It's a recurring theme in no-body prosecutions. The law can label someone deceased for criminal and civil purposes, but for the family, closure requires certainty, confirming where the remains are, being able to grieve at a gravesite, having the physical reality of the loss. The legal system can provide conviction. It cannot always give bones.
Let's return to specifics that still don't make sense. The pager call. Who paged Zebb that night? Owen's early version referenced a page or a call that led them to pull over. Later, Owen says it was all part of the setup with Gene. No independent witness confirmed a roadside stop. Why go into a payphone, come back panicked, then immediately rear-end a truck? And why, if the killing happened on January 2nd, would somebody then, 2 days later, impersonate Zebb to call in sick or leave a forged note at his job? What purpose does that serve?
Those are excellent questions. One possibility: whoever was handling Zebb's affairs immediately after his death sought to create a paper trail indicating Zebb was still alive and not at work. That could buy time and reduce early suspicion. Another possibility: the impersonation was an opportunistic act by someone trying to cover their tracks, perhaps not fully thinking through the forensic consequences. In cases where multiple people are involved in a crime, sometimes the cleanup is sloppy, which is why we sometimes find hair, fingerprints, or DNA. In this case, either the cleanup was unusually good, or the investigators simply haven't found it yet.
There's also the matter of the car itself. The lipstick, the hotel key, the puppy. Do you think those were a message, a taunt, a way to direct the investigation toward a romantic explanation?
All of the above are possible. Staging a crime scene, or staging an abandoned vehicle, with sexual or romantic cues can redirect suspicion toward an intimate partner or a jilted lover. The lipstick and hotel key point in that direction, at least superficially. The puppy raises another possibility entirely: compassion bait. A live animal inside a car is a strong magnet for human attention. If your aim is to make sure the car is found quickly and publicly, putting a puppy inside is a cruelly effective method.
Cruel is the right word. The waitress at the restaurant reportedly adopted the puppy. Small moments like that are bittersweet. But even with renewed attention after 2015 and the 2017 indictment, there are core things we still can't verify publicly. Was Zebb shot in Pisgah? Were his remains burned there? If Owen's account is accurate, the terrain and the passage of time make recovery unlikely. But if it's inaccurate, then the real location, the real story, remains out there somewhere.
From an investigative perspective, recovering remains after 2 decades in rugged forest is an uphill battle. Even if you get a good search area from a cooperator, factors like rain, time, scavengers, and subsequent land use can erase evidence. That's why, when you have a live cooperator willing to tell you a location, you take it seriously. You do targeted searches with cadaver dogs, forensic archaeologists, and careful grid work. But we don't have public confirmation that such searches yielded a body in this case.
Another unresolved element, Wesley Smith, the man Owens implicates as the jealous boyfriend who ordered the killing. He's not known to have been charged in Zebb's disappearance. That absence creates suspicion about Owen's motive for naming him. It pins blame on another living person, but with no public corroboration. Why isn't Smith charged? What would a prosecutor need?
To charge Smith with murder or conspiracy, prosecutors would need proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he participated, ordered, or conspired to kill Zebb. That could be admissions, corroborating physical evidence, testimony from independent witnesses, or documentation linking him to the crime. A cooperator's statement is powerful, but alone it may not be enough for a conviction, especially if the cooperator has credibility problems, for example, a history of violence or incentive to shift blame. Prosecutors often decline to charge someone unless they're confident they can make a jury see the full picture.
Let me press you on credibility. Owens is a man convicted of murdering 2 people, stealing from their home, and, according to prosecutors, attempting to discard remains. He had motive in 2015 to lie, and in 2022 to craft a narrative that minimized his role. How do prosecutors weigh his statements? Do they consider him useful at all, or poisonous?
It's complicated. On one hand, a person with Owen's background is a dangerous liar. He has shown an ability to manipulate facts and people to his advantage. On the other hand, if a suspect confesses and provides verifiable details that only the perpetrator would know, locations, the weapon's specifics, actions taken after the crime, that information can be independently corroborated and becomes valuable. In Owen's case, it seems prosecutors concluded they had enough to secure an accessory plea, but not enough to risk a murder trial where a jury might find reasonable doubt. That decision suggests skepticism. They wanted a legal affirmation of wrongdoing without betting the entire case.
That leaves us, as reporters and listeners, to sift through what feels like an incomplete record. For people who follow cold cases, that dissonance is familiar. The law moves toward closure slower than families, and sometimes in ways that don't satisfy the heart.
There's also the public policy angle. How often do prosecutors accept pleas that are effectively compromises with the truth? More often than the public would like to hear. Cases without bodies are expensive and risky to try. Plea bargains secure acknowledgement and punishment for at least some wrongdoing. But then the family must live with uncertainty. That moral calculus is imperfect.
Let's lay out the unanswered questions plainly, because that's the purpose of this show. What we do not know. Where, precisely, did Zebb die? Who pulled the trigger? If Owens is telling the truth about Jean and Smith, why hasn't there been corroborating evidence disclosed? Who paged Zebb that night? And to whom did he try to talk at the payphone? Why were the puppy and the lipstick and the key left in his car? And crucially, where are his remains? These are not academic questions. Each question is a wound for the family.
To add, did the investigators fully exhaust the physical leads from Owen's property after his 2015 arrest? Did new forensic techniques, improved DNA analysis, isotope testing, environmental DNA, get applied to the Mazda, the dog, or samples collected earlier? Sometimes cold cases get new life because a small, overlooked swab that used to be useless now yields something with modern methods. I don't have public confirmation all of that happened here.
Denise and the family have lived through media cycles, an investigation discovery episode, local reports, and podcast deep dives. They welcome attention because attention can generate tips, and tips can lead to evidence. But attention also cycles, and public memory fades. Every anniversary brings headlines that fade within days. The family's pain is consistent. The public's curiosity is not. Every anniversary brings headlines that fade within days. The family's pain is consistent. The public's curiosity is not.
Aaron, there's another theme we should underline: the ways cold cases are sometimes revived by new crimes. Owen's alleged propensity for violence only came into the spotlight when he was accused of the Cod murders. That's not uncommon. A person of interest in one cold case only becomes a charged suspect when they commit a new, provable crime. That raises questions about early investigatory prioritization. Were there missed opportunities in 2000? Hindsight is easy, but it's worth asking whether the signs that later proved meaningful were available earlier and weren't fully pursued.
People in Asheville still ask those questions. Did we miss chances? Could better record keeping, more exhaustive searches, or different forensic priorities have changed this outcome? The blunt answer is we can't know for certain. But it's a tragedy that the person who was last seen with Zebb later committed other violent crimes, and only then did the machinery of the law circle back aggressively.
Legally, the system will often close files by plea because it must allocate limited resources and minimize risk. That's an institutional reality. But your podcast's role, and the role of reportage in general, is to keep asking, to keep pressure on authorities to disclose what they can, and to keep the victim's humanity at the center. Too often, the victim becomes a footnote in an offender's later crimes. That's what you resist here.
And that's why, for the rest of this episode, I want to be very careful about tone. We have to hold the tension, acknowledging Owen's guilt in accessory terms, but not pretending everything is now explained. We also need to remember Zebb, not just as a case file, but a son, a student, someone who liked the idea of a sportier car and had plans for his life. He wasn't a mystery. He was a person who left behind family, who wanted nothing more than to touch some physical piece of him.
I agree. The strongest moral through line of cold case work is victim-centeredness. Law and evidence are crucial, but they exist to answer the human question: what happened to this person? When the legal resolution is partial, as with an accessory plea, it can feel hollow. The question of who did it may be answered in part, but the how and where remain.
Let's talk for a minute about the practical next steps that could still matter. If a listener has a tip or remembers details from 2000, what should they do? First, Contact the Asheville Police Department's Cold Case Unit or the Buncombe County DA's office. Crime Stoppers might also take anonymous tips. We can't provide their numbers in this segment, but those offices are public and receptive to credible information. Sometimes a single recollection, a person who saw a truck in a remote pullout, a conversation overheard in a bar, can be the thread that unravels a mystery.
Forensic possibilities have improved dramatically since 2000. Environmental DNA, better degradation analysis, and targeted ground searches using geophysical methods can sometimes find remains or corroborating evidence even decades later. If Owen's account points to specific areas in Pisgah, targeted searches with modern teams could still be fruitful. That requires prosecutors to be willing to open a search and to request the resources for it.
So, some paths forward do exist. They require political will, funding, and public interest. And they require investigators to take cooperator statements seriously enough to search intelligently, but skeptically enough to demand corroboration. It's a balancing act between hope and caution.
Exactly.
Before we close, I want to walk through a quick, plain timeline, not for drama, but to anchor listeners in what we actually know. January 2nd, 2000. Zebb finishes his shift at Walmart. About 9:15 p.m., surveillance shows him and Owens at a convenience store. They leave separately. Sometime afterward, Owens reports a minor car incident and seeks medical care. January 3-4. Someone calls Walmart pretending to be Zebb, and a handwritten note appears excusing him, handwriting later linked to Owens. January 16. Zebb's Mazda is discovered in a restaurant parking lot with headlights drained, a puppy inside, a hotel keycard, and lipstick on the rear window. Investigators search and interview. The case runs cold. 2015. Owens is arrested in the Codd's disappearance and murder. Evidence ties him to those crimes. 2017. Owens is indicted for Zebb's first-degree murder. 2022. Owens pleads guilty to accessory after the fact. Prosecutors accept the plea and get a legal acknowledgement that Zebb was murdered. Those are the scaffolding facts, what sits between us and the unknown.
And on that scaffold, missing pieces remain. The specific murder location, the body, ballistic or DNA evidence tied to a murder, and independent corroboration of Owen's later narrative. Without those, many of the story's deepest questions remain open.
In public statements, the DA said that while the full truth might never be known, the plea offered some measure of legal closure. To a prosecutor, that's often the end of the road. To a mother, it's a stop sign where the road kept going. Denise asked in interviews, "Where is my son?" That is the simplest question in this story, and painfully, the hardest to answer.
I can't say this firmly enough. The absence of a body matters. Bodies provide facts. They give us cause and manner. They enable us to test stories. When remains are missing, the criminal narrative is always more fragile. The family deserves more than paperwork. They deserve answers.
Before we sign off, a few practical notes. We will include links and references to the publicly available sources on our website, the Wikipedia overview, the disappeared episode, the Doe Network file, and contemporary reporting from CBS and local outlets. We encourage anyone with information, even something that seems trivial, to contact Asheville Police or Buncombe County authorities. And please, when you think about this story, think about Zebb as a person, not just a file. He was 18. He had a mother and friends and plans.
And to investigators and prosecutors who may be listening, re-examine the physical evidence with today's tools. Revisit the property searches around Owens with fresh eyes. A single DNA match or a microscopic particle of bone in an unexpected place can change everything.
This episode is not meant to convict anyone over and above the law's determinations. It is meant to hold space for questions the family deserves to have answered, and to remind listeners that legal closure is not always the same as truth. Zebb Wayne Quinn remains, in official records, missing, though the law says he was murdered. His family has no grave. They have anniversaries that pass like fresh wounds. If anything about this episode moves you to help, please consider sharing it, donating to cold case advocacy groups, or reaching out to local authorities with any tip you might have.
There's one last legal note. Accessory pleas and the decisions around them are common in the U.S. criminal justice system. They're unsatisfying in some cases, but they often reflect the best the state can secure given the evidence. That doesn't mean the moral calculus is right. It just describes reality.
In a small courtroom, many miles from where Zebb's car sat with its headlights dead, a plea was entered. The man who was the last confirmed person to see Zebb alive is serving life for other murders, and he acknowledged assisting after the fact in Zebb's death. The story that remains in the public record is built from fragments, surveillance stills, hospital records, a lickstick mark, a puppy, a forged note, and the decades between. For Denise and for all who loved Zebb, those fragments are not answers. They're reminders. This is Still Unanswered. I'm Erin Caldwell. Thank you for listening.
I'm Dr. Marcus Ellery. If you have information about Zebb's case, please contact Asheville Police. And if you work on cold cases, never stop asking, what more can modern forensics reveal? Thank you, Erin.